So, welcome, Soledad O'Brien, to
Hmm.
Talks to Go. Here on Talks to Go, we revel in the father daughter relationship, the uniqueness and specialness of that relationship. So, when you think about the relationship that you had with your dad, Ted, what made it unique or special?
Oh, so my dad was the best. I'm sure everybody comes on your podcast and tells you that their dad was the best, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news. My dad, he was just the best. My dad was great. Very kind person. Just every single thing you could possibly ever want in a father. Um, a good human being, kind to other people, slow to anger, like everything. And so I think for me, when he passed away in 2019, I just remember thinking there was this big gaping hole. He was pretty frail, but he got sick and died quite quickly, which in a way was a blessing because I think he didn't suffer much. Um, but I remember thinking in a way that was very different than my mom, who passed away about 40 days later. My mom had been sick for a long time. And so you kind of wrap your head around losing someone when they've been sick for a long time. But for my dad, I remember I would have thoughts about like, oh, I need to ask dad about this. Oh, I should ask him about that. Oh, I need to ask, and then it would kind of dawn on me like, oh, I can't ask him anymore. And so I just really, really missed him very viscerally for a very long time. But he was just a great dad of six kids and so smart and so thoughtful. And so he was a person I learned a lot about at his funeral because all of his colleagues spoke about kind of the genius of his work, which he never talked about. I had no idea. And so, it's always great to know people in a different capacity than you think you knew them.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was just a great person. Everybody loved him. I never met one person who was like, your dad was a jerk. Your dad was mean. Your dad said this cruel thing. Never, not once, ever, ever.
Mm. What was the most significant piece of information you learned that day at his funeral that you didn't know before?
I learned the degree to which he really was considered a genius in his field of science.
Mm.
The number of grants and the work that he did. I just had no idea. It would be like discovering um, that someone just operated at a very high level when really, if, I would have said like, oh yeah, he was a professor, but mostly he was my dad, Um, and so that was, and in a way, I don't know that the word significant is right because I think if he were alive, he would have said, well, listen, that was not as significant as being the dad. I had six kids. I love being a father. I could list 100 things that he did that made him a great dad. But it was a surprise to hear all these academic awards that he won. And, I just had no idea. And so that was pretty interesting.
You know what you just said reminds me of an interview I saw years ago of Howard Cosell. And Howard Cosell was asked, he said, ultimately, when
Mm.
you pass away, what would you like to see written on your epitaph? Great sportscaster, former lawyer. And he said, no, 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 none of that. All I want to be known as was a great father and husband. That's it. Everything else pales in comparison. Sounds like the same with your dad.
Yeah, I think that's really true, right? I mean, I would answer the same thing. I think work accolades are lovely and they're great, but they're not going to love you back. And you don't look out over, I think you look out over people you've affected, people you've mentored. You don't sit there and say, oh, that award right there, woof, that was a good one. I
Yeah.
think I think you really think about like, oh, that person whose life I changed, or this story that I got to, you think of it in terms of people. Certainly I do. And so, yeah, I think, my dad was a very athletic guy. And so he loved sports and he loved to try new things. So if I had to list the things that I learned from my dad, right, I learned how to um, ice skate. I learned how to swim. I learned how to ride a bike. I learned how to just like he was that person who, if he wasn't teaching you himself, he was making sure that he was making it happen. He loved to try new sports. I remember we were the first people who had the Commodore 64 computer in the neighborhood. We had a windsurfer. We always were like, okay, here's this new thing no one has. Let's figure it out.
Yeah.
And so he was just very adventurous that way. And he loved to sail. He was a great athlete. He was a professional athlete, actually. He was a rugby player and then left Australia in order to pursue his science degree. So I think athletics were very, very important to him. But again, in a weird way, he did not push his kids into athletics. So a lot of parents, I think, who were great athletes, it's important for them, for their kids to, and he just really, I think he just loved athletic pursuits and hoped that we would enjoy them, but he never sort of pushed us into sports.
Mm. Would you say sports is one of the main things that bonded the two of you together?
Yeah, yes, in a way. I'd say a lot of the fun things we did in our free time happened to be sports.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes I don't think of myself as a great person in sports, if that makes sense. And so saying like, oh, sports is how we bonded makes it sound like I was really good in sports. And it wasn't really the case. I mean, we did a lot of running together in the neighborhood. Again, I probably almost decapitated myself several times trying to try this windsurfer thing. I was a good swimmer to the point where I was a lifeguard, but again, I don't think he thought of, I think it was just a fun way to spend time together. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, you need to be the best, you need to win this, and not at all. I think it was just fun. And he loved trying new things. And I was like, okay, I'm here for it too. Let's try new things. But yeah, we spent a lot of time, certainly doing sports. My dad was a very engaged father. And I think, he was a professor, which gave him a good schedule for that. Right. So, he didn't work at, in banking or something, where I had a lot of friends whose dads would take the train in from Long Island into the city, which was an almost 2-hour train ride, work all day and then take the train back out. Right. Like that was a long day. And so they didn't really get to see their dad at great hours. Whereas my dad was a professor. He had a moped. And so he would zip in and out of SUNY Stony Brook on his moped. When everybody started getting mopeds, we had a moped. And so he would drive his moped in and out of SUNY Stony Brook. So he was usually home at dinner time, which was, somewhat rare, I think, for a number of my friends whose parents didn't, have a job where they were around a lot. So I got to spend a lot of time on the weekends. My dad, if he didn't go to a conference or something, and that would have been pretty rare, he was home, so I think I got to spend a lot of quality time and recreational time with my dad.
Mm-hmm. You sort of touched on this a little bit prior, but when you, after your dad passed away, when you were about to make a significant decision, did you ever think, what would my dad think? Or do you think I'm making the right decision? Would you ever think about him and how he would approach a certain situation?
Yeah, I think definitely in terms of how his mindset. When my dad got a little older, he began to, like a lot of older people, fell victim to some scams, so certainly around finances. Like I remember there was a guy who, he called my dad, actually said, I think I'm being scammed. I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, I'm supposed to get my tax return, back. My what do you call it? Your when you get your money back from your taxes.
Your refund, yeah.
My tax refund back. And he said, but the guy told me I had to send him $400 before they could send it to me.
Uh-oh.
And then the guy instructed him to go and get an iTunes card, and my dad was such a smart man to see somebody, but for him, iTunes card, like he didn't really understand that wasn't a credit card. He really genuinely thought that. So he started getting perplexed about that kind of stuff. And so, so certainly not in terms of like financial decisions, but in terms of like, how should I deal with this person who's annoying me? What should my mindset be around this thing over here that maybe I don't want to be part of anymore? Because he was very good at that, even into his old age. He was really just always a very lovely human being. And I remember so much when he really was very frail, pretty close to before he died. People were so kind. It was such an interesting window in New York City to see the kindness of other people. We used to walk. He lived on the East Side in the 40s. And I remember there was a Starbucks right there. And my dad would go into Starbucks. And even though he'd go into Starbucks every day, we would be going like it was the first time, like, what do I want to have?
Yeah.
And in New York City, right, where everybody's like, move it along, it's Starbucks. And people could not have been nicer.
Oh.
Everyone just stopped. They all let him sit there and think about what he wanted. By the way, he always ordered the same thing, a croissant and a small black coffee. And I'd be like, it's tall, not small. It's Starbucks. Nope.
Yeah.
But right. It was such a, I mean, every single time people would just slow down, never rushed him, couldn't, and it was such a nice window into, I mean, I don't think New Yorkers, I don't think we're considered to be like the nicest, kindest, sweetest, gentlest people on the planet. And it was just really lovely.
I think, by the way, I think New Yorkers get a really bad rap in that regard.
We do, true. Yeah, but sometimes we deserve a little chunk of that bad rap.
I agree.
For sure.
Pros and cons to New Yorkers, for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Soledad, you have accomplished so much in your life. You have won numerous awards. You run a very successful foundation. What do you think your dad would be most proud of?
My parents actually were really clear from the get-go about what they valued, and what they valued was good people. So I think they really did not value stuff. They were the kinds of people, and I don't think these people exist anymore, who like they would wear something out. Like they would have, they would just, the day that my dad's sneakers would fall apart, he'd be like, oh, I guess I need a new pair of sneakers. Versus the rest of us were like, oh, my sneakers are getting old. I bought new ones. I'm going to wear these until they die. And then I'm going to, no, he would just, and so he and my mom both didn't value things. They did not value money. They were not impressed by any of that. They used to walk around. They lived in New York City, and they would walk around New York City doing this, looking up, and people would come up to them. Like, of course, New York City, you look up, either you think someone's going to jump or you think these people are tourists, and people would come up and be like, oh, where are you trying to get to? They lived in New York City. They just loved tall buildings. They were enamored with living in the city. And so I always thought that was just very sweet. But they really just like good people. Like they were impressed by, are you a kind person? I don't really care what you do. I don't care about your title. I don't care about how much money you make. You do not need to show me your big house. Like, what kind of person are you? Are you a kind human being? And they genuinely meant that. When I left school, I left college for a fairly long time. When I decided, I thought about going to medical school, and then I decided not to, and I really didn't know what to do. And I just remember people would be like, oh, your parents must have lost their minds. And they really didn't. They were just kind of like, not. Some people, I think, live vicariously through their children's accomplishments. That just wasn't them at all. Not at all. And so I think that my dad would be most proud of like just being a good person, probably sending girls off to school, but not even that the foundation was successful. If I'd sent one girl off to college, he would have been like, yeah, that makes you a good person. That's a good thing to do. Are you in communication with your siblings? Are you helping people out? Then you're a good person. I think that would be important to him.
Yeah. Briefly looking into your life, your documentary, The Devil is Busy, was just named the winner of the Documentary Short Audience Award at the New Orleans Film Festival. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's a great doc, and it will come. We're in the middle of the film festival route right now. And basically the way it works is you put your films into film festivals, and if you win enough sort of in different kinds of category of prizes, then you can be shortlisted for an Oscar if those film festivals are what they call Oscar qualifying film festivals. So we are in Doc NYC next week, the week of the 13th, with that same film. The doc takes a look in the wake of Roe v. Wade being really killed by the Supreme Court, what happens to an abortion clinic in Georgia, where the rules now are quite strict around who can have an abortion and when. And we look at it through the eyes of a very religious woman who is the security guard for the organization, and a lot of her back and forth with the protesters who protest constantly, nonstop outside of the clinic. And I think it's just a really interesting take because I think a lot of these docs on abortion are yes, pro or no, bad, or and this is actually just through a human being who's complicated and has interesting past experiences. And so I love the story because it's very interesting to watch while you also learn the specifics about what's happening in Georgia and how the doctors are feeling about it and their own challenges with, are they going to be prosecuted if they make a bad call around something that they believe they're allowed to do legally, but then they're challenged, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just it's a doc short, and it's a really good doc. We were funded by the Ford Foundation to do that doc, which we went out to them right after the end of Roe v. Wade. And I just love the point of view of this woman who's very, very religious, starts her morning, on her phone, with her prayer group, but at the same time, very adamant about fighting for the women whose job it is, for which it's her job to protect their lives. So it's great. It's a really, really good doc. We're selling it, so I'm not sure where it will air at some point, but it will.
Well, we're looking forward to eventually seeing it for sure. Yeah.
I'm curious, so that was this in the works prior to abortion becoming a hot button political issue, but was it because of that? Okay.
Sort of, in that we knew we would do something. I mean, I feel like with affirmative action and Roe v. Wade, I don't think I'm a genius. I think we all knew how the Supreme Court was going to rule on both of those things. I was not surprised at all. So in both of those cases, we started working on projects before they actually were killed by the Supreme Court, because I felt pretty confident, and every sign was that they was going to be killed by the Supreme Court. But it wasn't until actually Roe v. Wade was overturned that then we were able to go to Ford Foundation and ask for funding. So it didn't really start before, but the idea was germinating. Because of course, with all our projects, you have to sit around and say, okay, we know we want to do something on this, but what is that something? What exactly what are we doing? And so that was kind of our strategy.
See, your mom and dad were an interracial couple. Your dad, as you alluded earlier, was from Australia, but of Irish and Scottish descent. Your mom from Cuba, Afro-Cuban. Interestingly, they were compelled to move their wedding venue from Maryland to D.C. to get married in 1958 America. Now almost
wedding venue sounds very fancy, by the way, because they were very poor. So wedding venue sounds like they had some money and they moved it. They didn't. I think that they just knew that they couldn't get married in the state of Maryland, where the interracial marriage was illegal.
Yeah.
And they could get married in Washington, D.C., where my mom had her sponsors when she came into the country. And so, but I think it was a very basic wedding. It was not, in fact, I still have the suit my mom wore to her wedding.
Wow.
Which was, I can't fit into it at all, but I have it. But, so it was a very simple thing. The interesting thing is when my older sisters were born in Baltimore, my parents moved back to Baltimore once they got hitched. My dad is listed. I discovered this after he died. He's listed on the children's, my two older sisters' birth certificate. His race is Negro. My dad was like the whitest white man you've ever, there's no kind of maybe, no, he's a very white dude. And so the idea that, clearly for legal reasons, they listed him as Negro, I'm sure. And, again, one of those things that when someone passes away, if I'd known that, I think of all the conversations you could have.
Wow.
Did the nurse just put it on there?
Yeah.
Did they say, was there a strategy around it? I don't know. But it was pretty interesting to see on both of those birth certificates, my extremely white dad was listed as Negro.
That's fascinating. Well, they were married in 1958 America, now almost 70 years later. What do you think your dad would think of 2024 America?
Well, in 2024 America, we are having conversations about maybe we shouldn't allow interracial marriages at federal rights. So, listen, I think my parents were optimistic people, but very well grounded in the reality of what race is like in this country, and so, my parents couldn't buy a house when they came to this country. My dad was able to eventually when he kind of started looking without my mom. my mom constantly was fighting for my siblings to get into the right kinds of classes in our public school. I mean, we used to have people march at the end of our driveway in order to limit the number of Black people who lived in our town. And across the street from the Smithtown Library in Long Island is a graveyard, is a cemetery. And only recently we started working on this podcast did I realize, like, there's pictures of people buried in that cemetery, and with them accompanying that burial is 30 or 40 people who are in full KKK garb. Like,
Wow.
it is the burial site in that
Wow.
in that cemetery of leaders of the KKK who back in the 1920s and 1930s were very much anti-immigrant more than dealing with like racial issues, which there are fewer obviously in Long Island. But clearly, I think I think they had their eyes very much open. So in a lot of ways, I don't think that it would surprise them, because I think they have always fully understood that a lot of the rights and opportunities you have in this country have to be fought for and then maintained. And then, they were just very clear about stuff. Nothing surprised them ever.
Well, either by example or spoken word, what did your dad teach you to appreciate the most?
I think Dad spent a lot of time with us. So I don't think he ever sort of said, so listen, as a parent, here's what you should be thinking about. That's just not what people in the 1930s did, do. But I think they were very good at, like, they lived within their means. They were very careful with their money. And they just spent a lot of time. Like, the bulk of my time growing up was just spent, hanging out and playing baseball. We had enough kids to be able to field that basically a baseball team, and then the neighbors could be on the other side. And my dad used to cheat for whatever side was losing. He'd help them out, and then it's constantly like that. Oops, he dropped the ball. Oops, to keep the game kind of fair. But I think the lesson really was just doing stuff with your kids all the time. I mean, most of our Saturdays, we live not too far from the beach in Long Island, was to go to the beach and take out the windsurfer or take out a boat. And I don't mean like a fancy boat. I mean like a little sunfish or something, to go and do fun things. And, that's really, we just spent a lot of time together. And I think that was really the lesson.
Soledad, if you could turn back the hands of time, what is the one moment that you had with your dad that you would like to relive?
Oh, gosh. That's such a great question. I almost broke into the Cher song, which I'm sure people do all the time when you ask them that. I'll spare you both. You know what? I think one of the best things my dad ever did was, I was learning to ride a bike. My neighbor, Helena was teaching me. And by the way, we had a gravel driveway. Do you know how hard it is to learn how to ride your bike on a gravel driveway?
Absolutely.
Like, I look back now and I'm like, my God.
Hard. I would think it's impossible.
No, you can do it.
Yeah.
I did it. Well, the tires were fatter, but it was
right.
we weren't running 10 speeds.
Right.
And I remember Helena teaching me how to do it. And I kept, toppling over. And then at some point I got it. And I remember my dad saying something like, oh, I knew you would get it. You're the kind of person who, when you put your mind to something, you always get it done. And I think he wasn't even, like, I don't think he was trying to give me some, talk me into believing it. I think, like, he genuinely thought, like, and it was such a great compliment which, by the way, is another thing I learned from him. Like, telling your kids what you see in them, helping them know that, is always really lovely. Because I tell you, I have taken that. I think I probably was 8 or 9 when I learned to ride my bike. There are times that I'd be trying to figure something out and I couldn't get it. I'd be like, I am the kind of person who, when I put my mind to it, gets it done. God damn it. And then I would try again. Like, I think it really helped me know that was a core thing of mine. And I think sometimes it's helpful to have your parents or someone who's close to you point that out to you. Like, oh, here's what I see in you that you may not even see in yourself. So probably that would be the thing that was really, I mean, truly, I remember working on projects even when I was starting my company and just being like, oh, this is so hard, but I am the kind of person, when I put my mind to it, I get it done. I think it was that thing that probably has really stuck with me the most.
Are those the kinds of things that you learned from your dad that I think, like you said, you've passed down to your own kids as well?
Yeah, I think it's just, and not only to my own kids, even with the girls that we have in scholarship. We had I remember once early on, some of the girls were at my house, and they're from New Orleans, a bunch of them, so they'd never seen snow. We had a big snowstorm, and one of them asked me to go sit out on our enclosed porch in the snowstorm. And she said to me, I know you say you see great things in me. Could you tell me exactly what they are?
Yeah.
Right? Because it helps to have someone tell you, it's not just, I think you're great and here's a scholarship. It's, I think you're great because you do this and you do this. And you're always the person who does that. And, you're the kind of person who always does this. Like, I think that is so helpful. So yeah, there's no question that I really learned to do that to everybody in my life. Like, it's really, I don't know, I find it really helpful. If you have girlfriends or someone's going through a breakup and you say to them, you're the kind of person who, when you really put your mind to it, you make a really good decision. So I know this is a tough one, but you're the kind of person who makes good decisions. You've made a bunch of good decisions. I know you're going to make a good decision because that's who you are. Like, that is so empowering to people. So yeah, I definitely took that as a lesson to do it to other people in my life.
Yeah, I agree. Specificity is very helpful and very important. Yeah, I mean, I've been going through like the job process and you get a lot of vague answers. So when you get that actual specific reason of how you can improve and better yourself, you're like, oh, okay, so that's what they're talking about. And it's not just like, sorry, your experience wasn't good enough, but these are the specific reasons of how you can improve and grow in your career. So I agree with you 100% on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we could return for a moment to the time you were at HBO Real Sports with Brian Gumbel, I must say. Soledad, what was the favorite story you worked on?
Oh my gosh, that's like asking, well, who's your favorite kid? Which,
Yeah,
by
I
the way,
know,
someday
I
I may
know.
have an answer
He
for,
had to
right?
ask.
But you have to have a favorite kid too. Now, what was your favorite
so
story?
many. Well, yeah, right. We all do have our favorite kids on occasion.
That's why I only have
did a
one.
story about a couple. Right. There you go. I did a story on a couple that had two boys, and they were in Boise, Idaho, and the boys were triathletes. One of the boys really took his younger brother along, who had a disease. His brain was very smooth, right? So he was missing the rivets that most brains have. And I can't recall the name of the disease, but it was some kind of encephaly. And so he couldn't really move. He couldn't move himself. He was moved from a wheelchair. And he was probably, I think when I interviewed them, he was maybe 9.5 years old. Because I asked them the estimate on how long he would live was 10 years. And so I asked them, like, his life expectancy is 10 and he's 9.5. And the older brother was the one who decided that they would do triathlons. He wanted to be able to do something with his brother. So he'd put him in the bike him, put him in a raft, swim with him. Great story. I mean, amazing family.
I remember that story. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Just a lovely, lovely, lovely family. And I think that was one of my favorite, but I love that whole show because all those stories weren't really about sports, right? Like, you didn't have to know anything. You could never had even heard about triathlon before and totally understood what this story was about, right? Because at the end of the day, it was about a kid who loves his brother, who's trying to figure out, how can he do things with his brother who's very disabled? And so it was, I love that. But there's a million of them. I mean, that was just a great show. So I'm picking that because I love that family. We went back and did an update on them recently where the brother, the older one, was about to go off to college.
Right.
And I think it would be the first time that he wasn't around his younger brother, who, by the way, defied life expectancy guesses. And so, yeah, it was a really great story, but all the stories were great. There was no story where I was like, ugh, this is a dud. And, when you're in news as long as I am, you do have some stories where you're like, well, this was not my favorite and we're not winning any awards for this one. We're just going to get it done. But that show, every story was fantastic.
If the phone rang right now, you picked it up, and it's HBO calling, and they're saying,
Do
Soledad,
phones ring anymore? Nobody.
Okay.
I'm looking around. We don't even have a phone in this room.
All
There's
right,
no phone.
your phone
Oh my
is
God,
buzzing,
you just
whatever, it's
dated yourself.
vibrating, whatever, it's
You get a
vibrating.
text.
So if I'm
Right?
getting a DM from someone, is that what you mean? On
Yeah,
Snapchat
yeah.
or something
Okay,
like
so
that?
you
in your
right.
yes.
All right, so you just got a DM on your Instagram from HBO, and they said, Soledad, here's the deal. We're thinking about rebooting Real Sports. We want you to host it. Would you consider it?
Um, yeah, because I consider everything. I mean, I'm a TV anchor lady. You could say, Soledad, we're thinking about doing a thing where you're going to have to juggle flaming pecan pies and also stand on your head. I'd be like, you think about that for a minute, but let me put you in touch with my agent because that's how it works. Yeah, I mean, that show was great, honestly. There's no reason why Brian Gumbel wouldn't be doing that show. So I would be like, clearly you're calling me because you have misplaced Brian's number. Let me give it to you because he should be hosting that show. He's an amazing host. But it was just a great show. And if they called me and said, listen, all of our anchor slots are taken and all the correspondent slots are taken. We need someone to come by every Thursday and collect garbage from the garbage cans of Real Sport. I'd be like, put me in. Yes, I will do it happily. Call my agent. It was just a great show. I mean, it was really one of those shows where everybody's really smart. Everybody's really hardworking. They told beautiful stories. Right? It just was such an honor, honestly, to work on something where the quality of the work is so high. And I've been really lucky. I've had a handful of really good opportunities where just the quality of the work is so high. You don't get that in everything you're doing all the time. And so, happily I would, but I would literally do anything they needed me to do.
I'm not blowing smoke, and Jill knows this for a fact. It's got to be one of my top 3 all-time favorite shows.
Yeah.
I always look forward. I think it dropped on HBO, I think the 21st of each month, right around there. And I could not wait for the 21st to roll around to see, watch the next episode.
It was such a great show.
Yeah.
And, again, I love the way they really removed the stories from sport, right? They were obviously grounded in sports.
Yeah. But
absolutely no knowledge of sports was required. And they really, without being cheesy, because if you think about every Olympic story that's ever done, right? They really emphasize young man came from a broken home and today a champion. I think this was just really grounded in the reality, excuse me, the reality of what it takes to overcome obstacles, whatever those obstacles are. Sometimes those obstacles are sports, sometimes they're physical, sometimes they're emotional. So it just was a great, great show. Yeah, people love that show. I mean, we had a really good diehard fan base.
Yeah.
Look, I love sports, and I maintain, and I'm absolutely with you. I really thought the show was truly about the human condition. That's what it was about.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. For good and for bad. The other story that we did was remind me of that football player who's accused of sexually assaulting all these women. You know who I'm talking about.
Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson.
Deshaun Watson. Yes. And interviewing all the young women.
Right.
One of the young women said to me, the nerve of me thinking that a famous football player would ever want to come to me. They had little like massage businesses that they were open. And she was sort of like, the nerve that I would think that a famous athlete would ever want to come to my business. It was heartbreaking. It was so heartbreaking to see somebody just, so that was another really good story that I got a chance to work on.
Yeah. Rapid fire.
Yeah, we've now come to the part of our podcast. That we call rapid fire roundup. So here's how it works. We're going to give you very short questions or choices without giving it any thought. Just give us your
that
reaction.
sounds like there's a lot of trouble you could get into when you do it that way. Okay.
So Jill has the first 2 for you.
All right. If you were stranded by yourself on an island, what would you rather have with you, a horse or a dog?
Oh, a dog. Horses are a lot. They're also very fragile. You know what? A horse that you have with you on a strand and an island would be a hot mess. And a dog.
Love. We're dog people too, so get it. Favorite thing to do on a crisp autumn day?
Move myself to Florida where it's warm. I do not like crisp and I do not like autumn and I like to be warm.
Okay.
Gather my belongings and put them in my car in preparation for driving south.
Fair enough.
Okay. Prime rib or lobster tail?
I'm not a steak person. I mean, I'll eat steak if I have to. I definitely am a meat eater, but I think lobster tail.
Okay.
I like fish better.
All right. Favorite sports movie?
Oh, Miracle on Ice, right? Wasn't that a great movie? Again, didn't have to know anything about hockey to think that that was a great movie and you cried through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Your Mount Rushmore of news anchors.
Oh, interesting question. I like that. I'm just going to do the ones that I really admired and liked. So Brian Gumbel would definitely have his face on my Mount Rushmore. This woman who was one of my very first bosses, her name was Jean Blake. She would have her face on my Mount Rushmore because she was such a great mentor and taught me a lot. Bob Bazell, who was my first boss in network news, who really used to say to me, there's opportunity in chaos. And I've repeated that 100 times to people. Think about that as you do your job hunt. There's opportunity in chaos. It's a really good thing to kind of use as your mantra, would be another one. I think I would have like a generic face, meaning there've been so many people who've been so kind over the years. When we would pitch things, our Black in America doc, Latino in America, even our doc now about abortion, right? The Devil is Busy, who would just say, yes, come on my show, talk to me, use this as a platform to pitch your project. Because the truth is, if you don't have those folks, your stories don't get any traction at all. And so I think just really recognizing the people who understand and appreciate what work you're doing and then say, yeah, I would love to give you the space on my platform to let you talk about it. I always am very grateful for that. So I'd like to thank the people who really helped me a lot.
Your next vacation destination?
That's such a good question because my husband and I were just talking about it. Our boys just went off to college. So now when we go on vacation, like vacations are now not family vacations, they're us vacations. Last year, we decided that Labor Day weekend is a good one because he doesn't have to work. Often on vacations, he works a lot. So, a vacation can just be a lot of phone calls if you're not doing it kind of in the right window of time for him more than for me. So we've decided that Labor Day, because everybody's kind of off on Friday and everybody's kind of off on Monday, is a really good vacation chunk of time for us. So I think we're going to maybe go to Croatia this year. We just went to Spain last year. That was our first vacation in a long time, just the two of us. And so maybe France, maybe Croatia. I don't know. We're not really sure where we're going.
Both sound lovely.
We used to go to Vieques in Puerto Rico. Yeah, right. And there, you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
You really, especially two adults who are good at traveling, you cannot go wrong.
Absolutely not. If you could invite two filmmakers, dead or alive, to your private dinner party, who would they be?
What a great question. You know what? I think I would pick a woman who I know really well, but we don't get to hang out a lot. Her name is Geeta Gandavir, and she is the woman who was one of the directors of this project. And we do a lot of projects together, but I haven't had like a 3-hour sit around with a glass of wine and just hang out, right? We're always planning, plotting, meeting, work. So I think that would be really interesting to have somebody like that. And I think another person who might be really interesting, who I know a little bit, we sat on a board together, was Ken Burns. I just like the idea of the historic documentary, and he raises a lot of foundation money. And I think being able to sit around with him and Geeta and say like, all right, give us the secrets of how you raise all this foundation money. That would be really helpful.
Okay.
Ken, if you're listening to this, feel free to just text me those details.
Shout out to Ken.
When Soledad O'Brien,
and of course, his work is amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. When Soledad O'Brien Productions produces the Soledad O'Brien story, who is the narrator, Morgan Freeman or Michelle Obama?
Oh, what a good question. I think you'd have to have Michelle Obama because as much as I love Morgan Freeman and honestly, The Voice, but I do think my point of view in all my work has always been wife, mom, Black, female, race is a big sort of thread through my work. Being a woman is a big thread through my work. Being a mom is a big thread through my work. So I think that voice would be important versus I think you want Morgan Freeman just to be like, Soledad O'Brien died today. Let me tell you all the great things about her. Like that's what I think his voice could do for me if he's looking for a gig.
I think he's always looking for a voiceover gig, He's always on there.
Man, wouldn't that be amazing to have? Could you imagine?
Yeah. All right.
That
And
would be
last
great.
one. Would you rather be an equestrian at the 20 Olympics in LA or host the primetime Olympics coverage?
Well, it would be a disaster if I was an equestrian at the Olympics in LA. So definitely no to that. Um, that's like, so would you like to have someone tap you on the shoulder and let you fly the 737? No, no, I would not. I do not want to do that at all. No, it's more like, would you like to be the groom helping Jessica Springsteen and her horse at the Olympics? Like that's a really, or McLean Ward at the Olympics. Yes, I would love to be the person responsible for giving McLean Ward's horse treats at the Olympics in LA. So yes
Yes.
to that. I also think the people who do the coverage are really good. And I think you have got to have done a ton of showing at a very high level to really see the nuance in the quality and where mistakes are made, right? I mean, a lot of, especially if you're looking at, for example, certainly dressage, which I've never done, I'd be a disaster. But jumping, right? You have got to really understand the sport and the strides and see where mistakes are made, where time is lost, where position is bad. I don't know any of that stuff. I get on a horse. I just try to stay on. I'm too old to fall off. So I go over my little short jumps. I have a very big horse now. He's 17.3, which is tall for a horse. But
Wow.
I am always telling people I want a short, fat, slow horse. Like I want to just clunk over jumps very safely. I've got a couple of ambitions for getting a little higher. I set out to do 2.6 last year. I reached that. Try to do a meter this year, which would be a big hike for me. But nobody wants that person to host the coverage, and certainly nobody wants that person who's not sure she can get over a meter to be doing a meter 50 in the jumping round. So yeah, no to both of those.
Never say never. Never say never.
Soledad,
Yeah, because I'm sure I'll get so much better as I get older. I mean, I'm sure at 75 I'll be much more amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we're now at a point in the podcast we call cross-examination for one very simple reason. We take you off the hot seat, and now it's your turn to ask both Jill and me a question. And you can decide, who goes first.
Can I ask two different questions?
Absolutely.
I guess I have two questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Number one, Jill, what's been the hardest thing about the job hunt? Because my daughters both went through this, so I'm very sympathetic. I think it sucks. It's just so frustrating, and you just want to kick a wall. So how's it been for you? What do you want to do job-wise? And what's been the most frustrating thing? That's three questions in one, but
That's
it's
okay.
multi-part.
They all go together. It's actually funny you asked this because we had our cousins over the other day and we were having a long discussion about this. And I think the hardest thing that's been happening is ghosting, being whether it's going in for a first round interview or even just simply networking and following up and not getting a response back. I think that's been the trickiest part is being left on red and not getting like the answers you want back, or even if it is a rejection, just hearing about a rejection and then kind of getting your life going again. So that's been the hardest part, I would say. I'm currently looking to go into sports media, so on like the social media end of things. And I've been looking specifically in tennis, but I love sports in general. So that's been my main goal at the moment. But yeah, I would say that's been the trickiest part, but it's really given me and taught me a lot about resilience and keeping that mentality strong. And, I like to say to myself, I give myself a day to grieve. If it was a really bad rejection, if I went through a 6-week application process, I had to do assignments and all of those things, I give myself a day to grieve. And then the next day I get back on the horse and I move on and I get my life going again. So I would say, yeah, just keep pushing. I don't know if that's great advice, but that's how
I
I've
think
been
that is
doing
great advice, right? I think that is really good advice. And I think you should think of it as practice. It's always a win if it's just practice. I'm just going into this interview as practice. I'm going to nail it because I want to practice.
Yep.
And I think my mom used to say that, take 24 hours, boo-hoo all you want.
Yeah.
And then hour 25, start your list. What did you get out of it? Where did you feel like sometimes I think people just are so overwhelmed and busy that it's not even a personal. They're not leaving you unread just because they hated you so much. It's just that it's a relatively low level, entry level position. And they at this moment have 17 other fires that are burning, including their own jobs. So, you know, that's just that. They're just focused. What's the favorite bit about this podcast for you guys?
A few things for me. First has been getting to meet people like you. What's really blown us away,
I
though.
teed that up nicely, didn't I? Wow, that was good.
No,
little compliment back.
Sincerely, I've said this repeatedly, so I know Jill's going to go, oh no, he's saying it again, but it's true. And I come to this with the perspective that in the world of podcasts, Jill and I are nobodies. We're not celebrities. Virtually nobody knows us, but we give ourselves, for whatever reason, and I don't know, maybe it's the father-daughter angle, and I think that's got a lot to do with it. It resonates with people like Soledad O'Brien. Why would a Soledad O'Brien who doesn't know us, didn't remember me from the elevator, why would she agree to come on to do something like this? And I think it is the uniqueness of the father-daughter relationship and the fact that we talk about it.
I love that.
Yeah, and I'm constantly blown away. You know, we're always reaching for the stars. We had one nutty idea, and a father-daughter duo who we reached out to was not your classic father-daughter in that they were not biological father-daughters. They were TV father-daughter. We reached out. We desperately wanted to get.
Well, more so you.
Well, no, both of us. Two things. I wanted to get Kevin Costner. And there were two options there. One was to get Kevin Costner and the woman who plays his daughter on Yellowstone. That was one. The other one that I really wanted to get was Kevin Costner and Gabby Hoffman, who played his daughter in Field of Dreams. Neither one came to fruition, but amazingly, CAA did respond to our request. I was shocked.
I love it.
Absolutely shocked. Yeah. So for me,
that's awesome.
That's been the most fun and the most gratifying.
Yeah, listen, I mean, sure, I think if your podcast has 20 zillion people, that's a good little business. But I don't know. I just like podcasts are just fun.
Yeah.
You know, like they're really, I've done some successful podcasts that were miserable experiences. And I've done some, you know, podcasts that no one would have heard of that were great, that really created lots of great experiences and friendships and relationships for me. So yeah, again, how you judge it is really based on, for me, bigger things than just, you know, how many eyeballs.
Yeah. And the fact that we get to work together.
I was about to say, are you ignoring me?
No, that's really the cherry on top of the sundae for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Yes, Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. He would be the sprinkle. He'd be the sprinkles.
Yeah. And the whipped cream.
Right. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, before we
let you go, we want to give you the opportunity to share any upcoming things you've got going on in your life or things you want to promote and share with our viewers, and also where they can find you and follow you. And
sure.
Yeah.
So I anchor a show called Matter of Fact, which is syndicated. And to find it, you should go to matteroffact.tv because because we're syndicated, we're on in different time zones around the country. We're in about 97% of the country now. And if you're in New York City, our documentary, The Devil is Busy, will be running at Doc NYC, the film festival, on the 13th. So anybody who wants to get a ticket, it's actually all great films, really cannot go wrong. Hopefully folks will come and watch our documentary.
Excellent.
Terrific.
And are you on social at all? Instagram, anything like that?
Way too much. Of course, the election's tomorrow. Of course, we're all on social. Are you kidding me? Yes. I'm Soledad O'Brien, pretty much on everything.
Easy enough. You heard it from her.
Well, Soledad O'Brien, thank you for an eye-opening, thoughtful, and very real talk to go.